Well, some studies have shown that the Nigerian capital market contributes about 7% to Nigeria's gross domestic product. But whether that figure is accurate or not, traders are talking about diversifying the system with the introduction of new products. At a meeting of some stock traders in Lagos, the discussion took center stage, and notable figures in the financial system brainstormed on issues that can accelerate the market.
A lot of the studies that we reviewed indicate clearly that on the average, if there's a 10% growth in the stock market, there's every likelihood you get about 31% growth in the GDP growth rate. That means 0.31% spike in GDP growth rate. Now, that is about growth of the GDP. But how do we convert this to development? And that is the critical thing I want us to also consider here. And of course, in context, I will look at where Nigeria is today with respect to what we refer to as the mystery index. Now, that index looks at 4 variables, essentially: the unemployment rate, the lending rate, inflation rate, and then the GDP growth rate. Now, when you look at the mystery index for Nigeria in the last 5 years, it has significantly spiked. Currently, it's about 32.4%, and that is very, very high and disturbing. So now, what role can the stock market play, capital market play in that regard? Of course, we know we can point out about 8, 9 different things that this capital market does in terms of economic growth. But I will pick on only 2 for us to pay attention to as an institute. One is the issue of de-risking investment in the capital market. That is an area I want to recommend that the institute should pay more attention to. Because really, yes, we broadly talk about the market providing opportunity for risk diversification. But when you again look at the way the market has played out in the last 4 to 5 years, in fact, as at half year 2018, you see 2 things play out. One is foreign investors, mostly portfolio investors, at about 72% of the stock market on the one hand. Then you look also at our external reserves, and there's a big lesson here from Argentina this year, where Argentina thought with the huge reserve they had, they were very safe, in fact, insured against currency crisis. But all of this reserve disappeared in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. So, and then the reference now is that solid external reserves, which as at today for Nigeria is about 17.3 months of our import bills, is really not an insurance against crisis. So if that is the case, then it means we need to make concerted efforts to strengthen the retail segment of that market. And that has to do a lot with de-risking transactions in the market. The second thing I want to say before I leave the microphone is the aspect of what I describe here as fostering innovation and creativity. Now, we've had references to that made by those who gave us goodwill messages. But I believe if this market will lift the economy in terms of development, then it has to do what it is known for historically, and that is to innovate and create in terms of the variety of products in the market, and then relating those products to the needs of the retail investors.
And that is why I have always said that we should continue to advocate for government intervention in the market. This is not the market you leave to invisible hands. Government needs to intervene if we must connect the capital market to economic development. Let me cite 2 quick examples. If you look at the 2018 budget, for example, the 2018 budget has a deficit of about 1.95 trillion naira, out of which the government intends to borrow about 793 billion naira domestically. The balance, of course, is going to be sourced outside. Now, this domestic borrowing, of course, through the capital market, what is it going in? Going in for? What is it going to be used for? Only yesterday, the Debt Management Office, of course, issued, I think, 67 billion bonds, raised 67 billion bonds to part finance the 2018 budget. Now, is that bond, the question we should be asking, our concern is, if we must tie it to economic development, are those bonds project tied, or are they just general obligation bonds? Because when you borrow and you don't tie them to projects, you are not going to have economic development. Okay? The poverty level will continue to rise in spite of the fact that the market appears to be doing well. That is one aspect. The other thing is, if you also look at the fiscal deficit, government is borrowing 1.6 trillion. The balance of 305 billion is expected to be gotten from privatization proceeds. Government says they want to raise 305 billion from privatization. Again, how is that privatization going to be done? That should be our concern. There are several ways of privatizing. If we end up selling these companies or privatizing these government assets to very few hands, poverty will still remain. Income will not be well redistributed. The Gini coefficient will continue to rise. Ladies and gentlemen, in India, if you look at the 2018 budget of India, you would find that government has said they want to privatize 24 central public service companies, that is government enterprises, including the Air India, their national carrier. Much of that privatization is going through the stock exchange. India has so many stock exchanges. Much of the privatization is going through the stock exchange. And of course, if you do it through the stock exchange, you give many more people opportunities to participate, as opposed to selling those assets to just few people. So we should be concerned about these processes if we must link capital market to economic growth. The other issue I want to mention before I rest my case has to do with education. Prof mentioned education. I was happy when I came here and I saw him. We belong to the academia. I teach in Nasarawa State University. And on our own part, we shall continue to propagate this message that the capital market is important in mobilizing savings for investment. And part of what I have done at a personal level was to invite the president of the institute, Mr. Dekoje, was in my university last month, together with the council members, the first president, second president, they were all there, and the registrar, to help me start a program in capital market studies. And by the grace of God, NUC is coming for resource verification for a BSc program in securities and investment. The University Senate has already approved it. But more importantly, University Senate has also approved a PG program and a master's program in securities and investment. And one thing we said we'll do with that program is that anybody we are giving admission to run that program, a 2-year program in master's in securities and investment, must register with the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers. Once you get admission, you show proof that you have registered, and before you graduate, before we give you that MSc in securities and investment, you must have qualified as a chartered stockbroker. So that is what we are doing by way of education.
I would say about developing and moving economies forward and growing economies, we should look at ourselves and look at other economies, the ones near us, the ones further away. Some studies have shown that our own capital market is probably about 7%, represents about 7% of our GDP, while in South Africa, for example, the capital market represents about 322%. If you look at other growing and fast-growing economies, you'll find out that they have a very large and active capital market, or they have multiple exchanges. So if you take a look at China, for example, they got multiple exchanges all over the place, developing different areas. And I think we as brokers need to aggressively embrace, one, the fact that there are so many ways of financing. Another thing we must embrace is that there are so many products that we should be developing that we are not doing right now. And if we don't, then we will not solve the problem that we do need to solve, which is financing growth in an economy. Not every single company, not every single enterprise needs equity. Therefore, we as brokers, if we are going to move the economy forward, if the capital market is going to move the economy forward, it must be ready to bring up those products and bring up those instruments that would allow these enterprises and allow the economy itself to move forward. Not only in terms of private enterprise, but also in terms of public endeavor as well. There is such a massive need, and the difficulty is when two academics have spoken before you, you have to be careful about quoting numbers. So I'm not going to quote any numbers because Mr. Adedikwe and Prof have spoken before me. I am not going to quote any numbers. But infrastructural need in this country is so big from the public sector, and really I think the capital market is not yet aggressively attacking that, which is why the government is still using ways and means, is still using treasury bills, is still using bonds, rather than us as a community, us as a capital market, actually meeting that requirement. Another thing I'll quickly say is that as a community as well, we must be extremely aggressive about acquiring information, acquiring knowledge, and be prepared to use it. The world is changing. IPOs are probably not as big as crowdfunding. Bitcoin has changed the shape of financial transactions. Structured products are becoming a lot more, they're being used in various forms, either to hedge risk or to enhance returns. I would say that the telecom industry as well, take a look at East Africa, the telecoms industry has probably taken a huge chunk from the banking industry. And so people are doing transfers and they're doing a lot more transactions through their phones than through their banks. So the world is changing. We as a community, if we're going to be a big player, and if we're going to stand up to the responsibility to move the economy forward and to develop the economy, we must be alert to those things. Of course, it takes some very simple things. It takes willpower from our part. The keynote speaker spoke a lot about education. I would really endorse that. He spoke a lot about knowledge building. And it takes a lot. We need to sit together as a community very often and actually share ideas and distill those ideas. And one thing I would like to thank our Apex regulator for is the rule-making process. The speed at which rules are being made and being tested would actually allow the capital market to respond a lot quicker to requirements. And so I'd like to thank the SEC for the speed at which they make rules nowadays. And I remember that there was a statement once from SEC that says, every Thursday, I believe, we sit down and we have a rules meeting. Even if there's no rules to be considered, sit down in that room and drink tea. It makes a big difference because it means that we can move a lot faster.
Don't be deceived. We still have significant roles to play. We cannot just sit and wait for government when it comes to identifying assets. In the last 3 years in PwC, we've seen all manner of opportunities from foreign or potential investors, some serious, not serious.